The rain hit the streets like tiny shards of glass, slicking the pavement, reflecting the neon signs of downtown Chicago. I was standing under a flickering streetlight, coat collar turned up, watching him leave. Jack Turner, the man I thought I loved, slipped into a black SUV like nothing had happened, like the betrayal he just handed me wasn't the kind that could haunt someone for years. I still remember the smell of his cologne, the way he smiled when he lied. He had promised me the world when we met at that art gallery 2 years ago, and I, 30, a mid-level financial analyst with a cautious heart, had fallen for every word. My friends, Sarah, 29, a tattooed barista with sharp wit, and Marisol, 31, a lawyer with a heart of steel, had warned me. But love has this way of blinding you, doesn't it? Jack had manipulated me professionally too. He'd helped me land clients, introduced me to contacts, but every introduction came with a trap. I'd just discovered he had siphoned off $75,000 from my client account into one of his shell companies. The realization hit like a train. All the late nights, all the strategic meetings, all the trust I'd poured into him, it was gone. I should have called the police immediately. I should have burned the receipts and never looked back. But my revenge wasn't going to be immediate. Jack thrived on power, on people bending to his will, and I realized I could be smarter, colder, and more patient than him. First, I needed intel. I started with his routine. Jack left the penthouse every morning at 7:30, jogged 2 blocks to a small cafe called Brew and Paper, ordered an oat milk latte, and disappeared into his office building. I memorized faces around him. His secretary, Gina, 28, immaculate in beige pencil skirts and a sharp bun, whose loyalty seemed bought with subtle threats. His assistant, Liam, 26, skinny, nervously twitching, someone I could manipulate with the right leverage. I had a plan forming. Step 1, isolate Jack from his allies. Step 2, hit where it hurts. His career, reputation, and finally, his social empire. I spent that night watching his social media posts. The life he flaunted, the expensive restaurants, the rooftop parties, it would all be part of my trap. By Monday, I had hacked into a forgotten account of his business portal. I didn't touch the money. I only left traces, breadcrumbs of fraud he didn't know I knew existed. Then came the part I relished most, human manipulation. I contacted Gina under a fake persona, an anonymous investor who had heard disturbing rumors about embezzlement and was offering protection in exchange for cooperation. Gina, eager to protect her own job, gave me everything, passwords, schedules, emails. Meanwhile, I kept my day job, hiding the storm brewing in my apartment above the Loop. Chicago's skyline was a constant reminder of ambition and ruin, and as Jack strutted through his glass towers believing he was untouchable, I prepared my first strike.
You learned quickly that revenge is less about fireworks and more about patience. The fireworks are for the movies. Real life prefers the quiet, surgical kind of trouble that makes people ask questions they can't answer. After I got Gina to talk, the puzzle pieces fell together faster than I expected. She thought she was helping an investor. What she was really doing was handing me the keys to Jack's calendar. Passwords, meeting notes, a list of people he'd paid under the table. She gave them to me like a woman handing over spare change. People with everything to lose will barter anything for safety. She wanted a safety line. I wanted an undo button. I kept working my day job at the bank as if nothing had changed. My coworkers asked about my weekend and I told them about my grandmother's casserole. I made coffee, I typed reports, I smiled. Meanwhile, I was cataloging ledger entries, cross-referencing invoices, and building a timeline of the $75,000 theft that would stand up in more places than a bar fight. I needed witnesses. I needed someone on the outside who wasn't invested in Jack's life the way Gina was. That's where Sarah's loyalty became the thing that mattered more than any spreadsheet. I called her on a Saturday morning and said, "I need you to listen and not freak out." She arrived at my apartment in a hoodie, hair in a messy knot, and a face that could be both merciless and tender in the same breath. I found transfers. I told her, sliding the printed bank lines across the kitchen counter like contraband. "See these? They loop through 3 shell companies and then to a consulting agency called called Breyer and Stone. That name's a dead end. But look here. I tapped a memo on an invoice. Client Entertainment, NYC. He forged the memo. That's not our terminology. Sarah whistled softly. He's not even subtle. Who's Breyer and Stone? Depends who you ask, I said, but I can prove it's a shell. I just need someone to make noise. Quietly, she grinned. Leave the noise to me. Marisol was the chess master I brought in next. She was a corporate litigator with a spine of iron and a black coffee addiction. She listened to my outline once, made 2 phone calls, then told me to breathe. You chip at the base. You make the structure wobble where he thinks it's strongest. His board, his clients, his social cachet. Let the rest fall. So we staged the wobble. First, I prepared the forensic package. I duplicated bank statements, exported email headers, and assembled a clean, color-coded timeline. I printed it out on heavy paper and made 2 copies, one to keep in my apartment safe and one to hand to the one person who could start an audit, a compliance officer at Jack's primary client. Jack's company did most of its consulting through a large retail client in the Midwest. If they withdrew, his house of cards would singe. Marisol sent the package, anonymous, with a note. Independent review requested. Suspected routing anomalies. The package arrived Monday morning with courier confirmation. I tracked the delivery and held my breath like someone waiting for a verdict. Second, Sarah started the social engine. She ran a tiny rumor, call it a whisper campaign, among a handful of people who mattered in Jack's circle. A bartender who'd worked his corporate parties, a photographer who did images for Jack's LinkedIn, an event planner who once supplied catering for his rooftop charity gala. She didn't scream. She tilted conversations, let people overhear the wrong thing, planted a "did you hear?" into the right ears. Gossip in a well-curated circle is like currency. It passes, it nestles, and it eventually gets spent where it hurts. Third, I used Jack's arrogance against him. He was fond of grand gestures and public loyalty tests. An email to the office meant to shore up confidence, a post celebrating a strategic partnership. I edited, not the content, never the content, but the timing. I scheduled a fake press release through a burner PR account to post the instant the courier scan confirmed the compliance package had reached the client. The message was innocuous. Jack Turner's team proud to announce new strategic initiatives, but timing matters. When the compliance team's inbox lit up at 10:03 a.m. and the LinkedIn puff piece hit at 10:05 a.m., the juxtaposition of celebration and suspicion made wallets twitch. People still underestimate cognitive dissonance. A man who brags loudly is the first person to be believed untouchable until he isn't. 2 days after the courier confirmation, the retail client put a temporary hold on payments pending compliance review. They didn't announce it loud. They emailed Jack's CFO with a quiet, "Please advise." Jack paced the glass office that evening like a caged animal under his neon skyline. I watched him from a distance. No, not literally. I peered at his feed, the same way he had once watched mine, and saw his panic play across dinner photos and a flurry of management memos. His face was a map of calculations. Which door is closing first? Then the call came. Marisol called me from the safety of her office, voice clipped but triumphant. "They've frozen transfers to Breyer and Stone," she said. "Jack's CFO is on a bridge call with their bank. This will trigger an internal audit at the very least." She took a breath. "Now we need the final move." The final move was always the riskiest. Physical proof tied to a human story. A bank ledger is cold. A missing $75,000 is abstract. So we added faces. We gathered 3 people who had been shortchanged by Breyer and Stone. A small vendor in Queens, an independent contractor who'd been promised payment and never received it, and a temp who signed a contract but found her invoice voided. We recorded them, without theatrics, just straightforward statements. We were promised X on Y date. We never received payment. We were told to send invoices to Breyer and Stone. Each statement was notarized. Each voice was human and shaky and authentic. We compiled the recordings, the ledger exports, the email headers, and a final printed timeline. Marisol helped me brand the packet with a neat cover sheet. We titled it Independent Inquiry into Breyer and Stone Payment Routing. Then came the hardest part for me. I sat up late,
watching the city through the rain-streaked window, and thought about burning the photos of Jack's smile that were still tucked under my spoon drawer from when I'd been foolish enough to keep them. I didn't burn them. I slid the packet into an envelope, sealed it with tape, and wrote nothing but a simple courier address. We moved like surgeons. We sent the package to the retail client, sent copies to the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit, and dropped one in the anonymous whistleblower lane at Jack's own company email, with headers intact, so it couldn't be dismissed as a prank. Then, I did what no woman should ever have to do for justice. I sat and waited and waited. The city hummed on, people commuted, kids biked, and somewhere a band played a muted trumpet. But inside my apartment, the air tasted like metal. When the first call came, it was not from the authorities or from my conspirators. It was from Gina. Her voice was paper thin. "They're asking me questions," she whispered. "They found weird wires in finance. They're calling Liam and, oh God, they're asking about you too." My stomach did a tiny flip. "Tell them I was helping them investigate a vendor," I coached her, my voice steady, because steadiness buys time. She did. She lied. She lied for a reason. Fear is a motivator as old as time. By Friday morning, Jack's phone lines were a mess. Investors who once toasted him in glassy rooms were asking for reconciliations. His friends called him to check in. The press smelled it and started nibbling at the edges. A financial blog specializing in local corporate scandal posted a throwaway line. "Sources indicate an internal review of transfers to Breyer and Stone." That was the spark. The spark met the tinder we'd laid quietly. The notarized voices, the ledger trail, the whistleblower emails, and suddenly the story had oxygen. Jack's empire, for all its chrome and polish, was vulnerable to the tiniest crack. He tried to staunch it, of course. He locked down servers, he paid a PR firm to spin narratives, he offered a short-term private settlement to one of the vendors we'd organized, thinking money silenced everything. But words had weight now. They had evidence, and evidence, once it finds an audience, grows teeth. That night, I slept for 3 hours and woke with a plan for the next day. This was not over. Men like Jack are combustible in public, but recalcitrant in private. He would fight, and he would try to turn others into shields. We would have to scrape clean his armor piece by piece. But for the first time since I stood under that flickering streetlight, I felt something steady and dangerous, momentum. The city hadn't noticed me yet. They would, and when it did, it wouldn't be pretty. The morning the headline dropped, the city felt smaller and louder at once. I was at my desk when the push alert lit my screen. Major client halts payments to Turner Consulting amid fraud probe. My hands went cold, then hot. Around me, the open plan office continued its polite hum, people in headphones, a distant laugh. But my world had narrowed to the pulse in my throat and a single thought: keep breathing. Jack didn't crumble publicly. That wasn't his style. He went on camera, smiling like a man who'd been practicing his face in glass for years. He called it an administrative hiccup, a temporary pause, a phrase that tasted like lipstick on a liar. The PR firm churned out statements faster than I could breathe. His board issued a calm letter about cooperating with auditors. The world, for the most part, wanted quick fixes and comforting language. But under the surface, the water was boiling. Investors called. Vendors pushed for payments. Someone, probably the retail client, filed for a formal forensic audit. Jack's phone turned into a war room. Late-night calls, whispered arguments, a parade of lawyers with bad coffee and better suits. I watched the live feed of his life like it was evidence, like a documentary I'd curdled into being. Then came the retaliation. Men like Jack don't go quietly. They swing at anything that might have cut them. Within 48 hours, our office inboxes filled with a malicious packet, a compiled folder of selective screenshots, an edited audio clip of a private joke taken from a meeting, a tip that I had been accessing client accounts improperly, phrased to look like a whistleblower complaint from a colleague. Someone had doctored headers so it looked internal. People forwarded it, people whispered. My manager, the one who'd always been casual in his suits, texted me, "We need to talk in HR. Now." The first HR meeting was polite, clinical. "We've received allegations about your access to client files," HR said in that soft, professional voice that is never truly kind. I answered carefully. I spoke about encryption, access logs, my role in operations. I explained the timeline. They put me on paid leave pending an investigation. It felt like sand shifting beneath my feet. Suddenly the hunter smelled prey. Jack's team was efficient. The smear spread through networks, a rumor that I'd been skimming, anonymous posts, a private message to our biggest client questioning my integrity. Even an old college anecdote about a reckless semester resurfaced in a forum. They were trying to bury the truth under filth. It would have been easy to panic. It would have been easy to walk away and let this settle. But I had two things they didn't anticipate: patience and backups. While they polished my character in the mud, I needed help. Detective Harris, steady, weary, an anchor, called because someone on his side of the trail wanted to know if I had been targeted. He'd been watching the compliance trail since the client triggered the audit. "This looks orchestrated," he said over my kitchen counter, balancing a styrofoam cup of takeout coffee like it was an evidence bag. "We're seeing logins from a VPN that traces back to Jack's assistant, then to a series of proxies. Someone is trying to frame you." Relief buckled through me like warm water. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "He can, but we need a clean chain of custody. You have anything else? Originals? Paper printouts?" I gave him everything. The notarized vendor statements, the courier receipts, the forensic package. I also handed him a sealed drive that I had tucked away the minute the courier scanner had chimed, unedited email headers, server logs, and a mirror image of Jack's internal drive with timestamps intact. I thought of everything. Backup paths hidden in places an IT director wouldn't think to look. That drive was the insurance policy I'd whispered about to friends, the one I promised I'd never open until cornered. Harris left with the drive and a serious that made me feel small and enormous at the same time. But Jack had more teeth than I'd imagined. He hired a private investigator, someone with a suitcase that smelled of tobacco and old flights, and he started turning over rocks in my life. The PI found that I once overdrafted a student account, that I'd been late on a rent check in a year I'd been underpaid, and he stitched those little sins into a narrative of moral hazard. He's always been edgy, he told any reporter he could bribe, and the tabloids ate it up. People love a tidy villain. They like to believe in moral cause and effect. The truth was messy and didn't make headlines with the same ease. I watched as friends, who weren't close, made the math of reputation against risk. A client rep I'd helped personally for 5 years avoided my call, citing executive comfort. That hit like a fist. But I also watched who stayed. The ones who texted no questions, only "call me if you need anything." Sarah was the first to arrive, a greasy bag of takeout and an angered face. Marisol called in favors. She issued subpoenas with a voice like steel and a smile of weathered amusement. Gina, terrified and torn, left a tearful voicemail that said, "I didn't know he'd go this far." When the PI showed up at my apartment building asking questions, Gina's phone call to my number that night was a lifeline. The city, at its best, is a jury of small mercies and grudges. The tide turned in small increments. A voicemail that proved my alibi, an IP trace that tied the smear packet to a proxy server unusually linked to the office, a vendor who reiterated testimony after being threatened, this time recording the intimidation. Harris produced a warrant. The private investigator found himself on the defensive, his sources dry and his invoices unpaid. And then in one dizzying week, the private investigator's list included Jack's name in a way he could not spin away. Harris arrested him on a felony related to the forged transfer memos and the creation of shell vendors. The cameras came, and Jack's face in handcuffs was a study in disbelief. His PR team tried to salvage it with a prebuttal about rogue actors, but the headlines had teeth this time. I stood across the police station doors as the swarm of reporters shuffled, and a low, complicated thing swelled in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was a deep, tired remembering of what had been taken. time, trust, a future. Someone hugged me, Marisol, strong and steady, and I let myself be held because I had built the whole structure and I could finally, maybe, allow the cracks to show without the world thinking me weak. But the story was not over. Jack's arrest was a moment, not an ending. The company had not collapsed. It was dented, and damaged empires often fan their fury outward. The board moved to appoint an interim CEO. Some executives quietly brushed their hands of the scandal. Others sought a scapegoat. And in the quiet hours, the one thing I hadn't yet seen reappear was Jack's most dangerous weapon, his social capital. Friends who could wound far beyond legal filings. There would be more hearings, more press, more late-night calls from lawyers wanting signatures. There would be more noise. I had the evidence. I had the receipts, but being right didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like another battlefield I'd chosen to fight. When I walked home that night, the rain had stopped. The city smelled of wet asphalt and hot pretzels and the electric promise of winter. Lights from 100 apartments winked like little accusations. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and sat at my kitchen table. On it lay the photos I'd once thought to burn, the ones of Jack smiling in my kitchen, the ones I'd kept like talismans against forgetting. I didn't burn them now. I spread them out, touched one, and put them back in the drawer. Because revenge changes you. It doesn't make you whole, it rearranges you. It teaches you that justice can be pursued, but it also teaches you what you might lose in the hunt. Outside, somewhere, a taxi honked. Inside, Marisol texted, "Court prep at 9. Be ready." I sat up straight and whispered to the empty room, to the city that had watched and judged and almost swallowed me whole. Bring it on.
The next morning, the city's hum felt heavier, like it knew what was coming. I arrived at the courthouse before sunrise, my coat buttoned tight against the chill, laptop bag over one shoulder, a thermos of coffee in my hand. The streets were still wet from overnight rain. Headlights shimmered on puddles, and the subway screeched in the distance. Every reflection of glass and steel seemed to echo the tension in my chest. Marisol is already waiting at the entrance, her sharp black coat and professional tote giving her the aura of a battle-hardened general. Her auburn hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, her green eyes calculating every passerby, every shadow. "Morning," she said, nodding. "Ready to make him accountable?" I nodded, though a knot of nerves twisted in my stomach. "I have everything," I said, laying out the stack of printouts, the original logs, emails, IP traces, vendor statements, the forensic copies of Jack's drives. "He can't spend this." "You'd be surprised," she replied with a faint smirk. "But not today." Inside, the courtroom smelled like polished wood, coffee, and tension. The walls echoed with murmurs as attorneys, journalists, and onlookers filled the seats. Jack entered, flanked by his high-powered legal team. His expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes when he saw me. A corner of his smirk quivered. The judge called the session to order. Jack's team tried to delay, argue procedural points, but Marisol, ever unflinching, countered with precise citations, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Your Honor, the evidence is complete and time-stamped. Any delay would compromise the chain of custody and obstruct justice." I watched as the first piece of evidence, a printed email header, was displayed on the projector. Jack's lawyer leaned forward, whispering frantically, but the chain was airtight. Every forged document, every doctored file, every manipulated log was countered with the originals. The forensic drive became the linchpin. Marisol guided the court through each timestamp, each server log, each misstep Jack's team had tried to cover up. Jack's smirk faded. His calm veneer cracked. I saw it in the way his hands fidgeted, how his voice occasionally caught when he spoke. Every word he had spoken publicly about temporary hiccups and administrative errors was dissected and proven false. The jury's eyes flickered to him, then back to the evidence. Then came the audios. Marisol played a few clips of his assistant coordinating with the proxy servers, emails where Jack explicitly instructed the fabrication of reports and the forged complaints against me. The room shifted.
Even the most skeptical spectators leaned forward, mouths slightly open. I felt a rush of vindication, a fierce warmth that traveled from my chest to my fingertips. Not yet joy, but justice taking shape. Jack's defense tried to argue motive. She's disgruntled. She wants revenge for personal grievances. His words sounded hollow. Even to me, Marisol responded calmly, any personal grievances are irrelevant. The chain of fraud, the intent to fraud the client, and the deliberate targeting of Miss Carter are evidenced by timestamps, server logs, and internal communications. These cannot be fabricated. The court fell silent. The weight of fact, proof, and preparation was undeniable. During recess, I stepped outside for a breath of cold air. The city was waking up fully. Delivery trucks, cyclists, pedestrians hustling with purpose. But I felt a rare quiet. Marisol approached, holding 2 coffees. She handed me one. Drink this. You'll need it. The cross-examination will be brutal. Back inside, Jack's lawyer tried everything, questioning witness credibility, suggesting technical errors, but each claim was countered with hard proof. Each attempt to sway opinion failed. By the afternoon, Jack's confident posture had sagged. He whispered into his lawyer's ear, his tone sharp and almost pleading. The legal shield he had relied on for years was breaking. Finally, the judge called for closing statements. Marisol's voice filled the room, precise and unwavering. This case is not about vengeance. It is about accountability. Miss Carter was targeted, defamed, and threatened professionally. The evidence is clear. Mr. Turner orchestrated the smear, attempted to undermine her career, and manipulated internal processes for personal gain. Justice requires recognition of facts, not favors, and not fear. I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Jack's eyes, rimmed with frustration and disbelief, met mine briefly. There was no apology, no plea, only the faint recognition that his web had been unraveled. The judge reviewed the evidence, consulted briefly with the jury, and finally, in a voice that carried authority, declared, "The evidence against Jack Turner is compelling. His attempts to defraud, manipulate, and intimidate Miss Carter are substantiated. The jury will now deliberate on penalties and restitution." Outside, the city felt different. The streets, the buildings, even the air seemed to pulse with possibility. I knew there was still work to be done, restitution, reputation repair, and rebuilding, but the first major victory had been claimed. Marisol turned to me, eyes gleaming. "You did everything right. Patience, preparation, documentation. This is how you fight someone who underestimates you." I nodded, a small smile finally breaking through. The city around me was chaotic, alive, and indifferent, yet in this moment, it felt like it had sided with truth. And somewhere in the shadows of glass towers and office lights, Jack Turner had to face the consequences of underestimating someone he thought he could destroy. The puppet strings were cut, and for the first time, the city's pulse felt aligned with justice. The morning sun glinted off the skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the urban streets. I stepped out of the courthouse, feeling the city pulse beneath my feet like it had been waiting for this moment. The verdict had been announced. Jack Turner was found guilty on all counts of professional misconduct, fraud, and defamation. Restitution would follow, and his reputation, already fragile, was in tatters. Marisol caught up with me, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. "You were brilliant in there," she said, adjusting her tailored blazer. Her auburn hair swayed, green eyes flashing with satisfaction. "He didn't stand a chance once the jury saw the evidence." I exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and triumph. It still feels surreal. 4 months of planning, documenting, and building a case. And now this. Not just building a case, she corrected. You built a fortress. Jack Turner underestimated one thing, your patience and precision. That's what real power looks like. The city around us carried on, honking taxis, delivery vans, street performers. But for once, it felt like it was in my corner. People walking past seemed to carry an unspoken acknowledgement that someone had finally stood up to injustice. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment to find the first restitution check sitting on the kitchen counter. The amount was substantial, enough to repair the damage he'd caused and to reclaim the professional footing I had lost. My phone buzzed. A former colleague heard the verdict. "Congrats." Justice well served. I smiled, fingers tapping a quick reply. Thank you. It finally feels like the scales have balanced. But the true satisfaction was not in money. It was the dismantling of Jack Turner's arrogance, the public exposure of his manipulations, and the knowledge that no one would underestimate me again. I decided to take a quiet walk, letting the city's evening hum soothe the adrenaline that still coursed through me. Neon signs reflected in puddles, pedestrians hurried past, and the scent of roasted coffee beans mixed with exhaust fumes. I walked past the high-rise where Jack Turner's firm operated, knowing that inside, his employees whispered, rumors spreading of his downfall. The man who had tried to ruin my life now had to face not only legal repercussions, but also the social fallout of his actions. A week later, I received a call from Marisol. Everything finalized, she said, voice carrying that familiar mix of pride and authority. Jack's license is under review, the board meeting reports are in order, and the clients he tried to deceive are being informed. Your reputation is restored, stronger than ever, and legally, you're untouchable now. I leaned back in my chair, thinking of the journey. Every late night, every careful log, every cautious step I had taken. The city had been my battleground, and I had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. I wasn't the same cautious, defensive person who had started this fight. I had become someone who demanded respect, someone who would not allow intimidation to dictate her life. Then came the final touch of poetic justice. News outlets began to pick up the story. The headline read, "Corporate Manipulation Unraveled. Turner held accountable after employees' meticulous investigation." Social media buzzed with support, colleagues sent messages of admiration, and even strangers reached out to commend the methodical way I had exposed Jack's fraud. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, fierce satisfaction settled. Revenge was sweet, not for the sake of anger, but for the restoration of justice, dignity, and truth. I knew the city would continue to be chaotic, indifferent, sometimes cruel, but I had carved out my space in it. My name was no longer associated with the smear campaign, no longer linked to fear or intimidation. I had faced one of the most ruthless adversaries in the urban corporate world and emerged whole, victorious, and respected. That evening, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The hum of traffic, the glow of office windows, the distant sound of a siren, all reminders that life moved on. But this time, I was in control. Every step, every decision, every act of calculated patience had led to this moment. The city belonged to those who fought with intelligence, courage, and unwavering resolve. And I had just claimed my place. I finally leaned back, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, a subtle smile on my lips. Justice had been served, revenge had been completed, and the city, vast and indifferent, seemed just a little more aligned with truth tonight.